Hello, hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is your girl Mitzi, and this is Mitzi. Let's think about it. Today we are thinking about fetal alcohol syndrome, FASD, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, this is what is on our minds today. Goodness, tongue tied. So luckily for me, I have Patty here who's gonna help us really think about this in a new light. So, Patty, let's dive right in. What does
Yes.
FASD make you think about?
Well, Mitzi, thank you so much for having me on your show. So I'm always excited to raise people's awareness of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. Fetal alcohol syndrome is one diagnosis under the umbrella of the spectrum disorders. So like autism, it's a spectrum.
Oh,
And whereas most people think of spectrums in terms of a line, right, with high functioning on one end and low functioning on the other end,
yeah.
truly, this is not a linear spectrum. It is
Okay.
multifaceted, multidimensional, because alcohol affects whatever it comes in contact with throughout the pregnancy.
Hmm.
So the effects vary widely from one person to the next, depending on the timing. Was alcohol consumed during the days 17 through 21 of pregnancy, in which case you get the facial features associated with fetal alcohol syndrome.
Did not know that.
Outside of that, though, every single body system that we have is developing. And of course, our brains are developing throughout the entire 9 months of pregnancy. So it takes the biggest hit in terms
Mm.
of damage. Basically, it is a full body diagnosis. There are 428 comorbid conditions that people with FASD have a higher likelihood of developing, significantly higher risk of developing than the general public. That study came out in 2020 from a fantastic young group. I say young because some of them are in their 40s, but I'm 61 next week, so they're young. But they're fantastic people because their motto is nothing about us without us. And they want a seat at the table, not to be trotted out to say, oh, here, look at these people with FASD, and then dismissed, but to
Yeah.
be part of the research, which is a myth buster, because there's a myth out there that people with FASD have low IQ, they're all
Yeah.
low functioning, and that's just not true.
Yeah, I was gonna
Many of us
say.
have graduate degrees,
Oh,
and I've got 3 master's degrees and I have it.
yeah, I think that's
So,
very nice. I'm glad that you talked about it as a spectrum because you're
mhm,
absolutely right. They don't teach about this in school. They just tell you if you drink while you're pregnant, this is what's going to happen, and you're going to have complications with your child, and the child is going to have a very difficult life
yeah.
becoming until its adulthood and beyond. And it's kind of it's scary when they put it in that intense, but I think that's what they're doing is they're just trying to scare women to just not drink while they're pregnant. And obviously don't do it. But I don't think it actually explains the details
Yeah.
of what actually can really happen the way that you did because I didn't know that. I didn't realize it was a spectrum as autism has a spectrum, but it makes sense if you think about it because everybody's
Yeah.
body's different
Hmm.
and everybody's tolerance for alcohol is very different.
Well,
So
and the
it
babies
will
is different from the mothers.
exactly. So
Yeah.
it's crazy to think because they don't realize like your child is gonna eat before you, it goes to your child first and it's right there, like
Yeah.
connected. So it's really crazy to think that. And I'm glad you brought that misconception because it seems like there's a lot more misconceptions out there because if you were talking about their like mythbusters, what is another misconception that we just
Oh,
don't know about?
there are so many. A lot of people, when their kids are first diagnosed, they go to Dr. Google, right? Or whatever their search engine is, and they put in a couple keywords, and they're
Yeah,
often likely to find studies that are based on, small samples or the worst of the worst.
that's
Um,
very true.
one or the other thing is actually erroneous about the study, or it's devoid of the context. And one of the ones that scares the bejeebers out of many parents is the average lifespan is supposedly 34 years old. Well, that's a
34?
terrifying thought for any parent, and it's a terrifying thought for anyone newly diagnosed, but it's also very wrong.
Yeah,
It was one
exactly.
study with a small sample, and the particular population that they had studied were all people who had never received supports, never received a diagnosis until late after. Um, let me back up a little so that makes more sense, right? Um, you mentioned that alcohol goes through the placenta, right? That's to the baby first. And that's very true. Um, but the baby's liver, although the liver is created in that first month,
Okay.
does not produce the enzymes needed to break down alcohol. So when we think about adult drinking, we automatically realize, oh, the liver. That's why people who are long-term dependent upon it often have a swollen abdomen because their
Yeah,
liver is so inflamed, right?
correct.
But the enzymes that do that work don't exist in the babies for a long time. There's two primarily.
Hmm.
The one enzyme doesn't even show up barely before delivery at the end of the 9 months. The other one is first found in the brain and only in the eighth month, the second half of the eighth month shows up in the liver. So
Wow.
because it's in the brain, that's where the alcohol gets
Yeah.
broken down into its toxic particles. And basically, what you have is a chemical IED going off in the baby's brain.
Wow. What a description. I'm a visual person, so I was able to visualize everything of that, and I could just see it just
Yeah.
happening. And I'm just in complete amazement. Ladies and gentlemen, for the ones who are just listening, I'm amazed because this is something I did not know. So it's just like with you, how did you find out that you were a baby with FASD? How did
Um,
that come across your life? Like, as a mother, I don't think I'll just randomly tell my child, so, hey, Susan, guess what? You're an
right?
FASD baby. Like, no, no, that's weird. So how did that come up for you?
So, so most of my career is in child welfare. I started
Okay.
in addictions work, then I moved to mental health. I was
Okay.
clinical director of a psych unit back east for a while. When I moved to California, all the licensing laws are different. So I went back into social work, which is actually
Okay.
where I started. And working in child welfare, you see so many kids falling through the cracks, ending up homeless, ending up suicidal, ending up
Yeah.
addicted, ending up trafficked, right? A lot of
Mhm.
sex traffickers, there's a magnet for foster kids.
Yeah.
And a lot of families were giving up, right? They were feeling ill prepared and they were floundering, and it was creating so much stress that providing care for kids in need became not worth it anymore. And so my
Wow.
heart was breaking for everyone all around. And
Wow.
so I started looking, well, is it trauma? I became a based relational intervention provider. Well, that helped, but it wasn't enough. And a friend of mine who's adopted several kids with FASD said, you need to learn more about this. And as I was studying it, most things that I want to learn, I go after certifications for it.
Yeah.
So as I'm studying it, I'm thinking, oh, I do that. I do that too. Oh, good golly, I do this. And so I went to my mom and I said, did you drink when you carried me? And she's like, oh, yeah, every day. Because it was the 1960s. Nobody knew
It
any
was
better back then.
normal.
FAS was discovered
Yeah.
in 1973.
That's
So it's been
interesting.
around, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder has been around as long as alcohol has, but it only became a thing, right, worthy of literature reviews and research in 1973.
Wow. That is
So
fascinating.
Yeah. But we can't blame the mom. We
No.
absolutely cannot blame the women because they're not the problem. It's the alcohol that's the
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah,
If you think
absolutely.
about, you're a mother, right?
I am. I am.
How far along were you when you realized you were pregnant?
Um, a month in, a month, yeah, a month and a half in, I realized it.
6 weeks.
Mhm.
Okay.
I, I realized it right
So,
away. But I'm not a drinker though. I never had the taste for it because when I
yeah.
was young, because I lived life early. So I was the one that got the fake ID, jumped the clubs. I did that early, early in high school. So I already had that taste for alcohol. And one New Year's Eve, I got really wasted where I blacked out. And I only literally remember a glimpse of me getting home.
And that's,
And
yeah.
that scarred me for life. And then I got my tonsils removed when I was 18 and ever since then, anytime I have alcohol, it goes in like the jaw lining and
Mm.
it goes right there. So that's why it's just like I don't even drink
It's
alcohol.
not worth it.
It's literally not worth the pain
Yeah.
because I get pain from it now. So it's
Yeah.
just like, no, I'd rather not drink. I'm okay. Give me my
Yeah.
tea. Hello.
Yeah. So that's 6 weeks. I mentioned earlier that if alcohol is consumed between days 17 and 21, you get damage to the tissues that later become your facial features.
Oh,
So how many weeks is days 17 through 21? It's
it's
two and a
there.
half weeks in.
Yeah, it's early. And women don't realize it and don't recognize it because I didn't realize it until somebody was like, "You look like you're glowing." And I was like, "Stop it. I just got a tan. It's summertime and it's pretty." You know what I mean? Because it's May and like I'm shiny. You know what I mean? That's the reason why. And they're like, "No, Mitzi, something's up." And when I
Yeah.
took that test, it was like surreal. So I was just like,
Yeah.
oh my goodness. I'm
Yeah.
so glad that the first thing words that I said was like, I'm so glad I don't drink because
Hmm.
it's a scary thought because I was craving it too. I was just like, oh, I haven't had it in so long. I barely have it. What is one drink? And then I was just like, no, let me just not because and then I'm so glad I don't. I didn't.
So if you have, if you're like me, it was the girly cocktails, right?
Oh, the fruity ones, yeah.
The fruity ones, the sweet ones, right? And so if
Mm-hmm.
you think about an alcohol intensive cocktail, for instance, a Long Island iced tea,
They have a lot
that
of
has
alcohol.
6 shots of alcohol. Or an Alabama Slammer, that has 7 shots of alcohol and 1 shot of orange juice.
One
You
shot
got
of
it,
orange juice. Yeah, what is that? That's just for seasoning? Ah, let me just add a little bit of
right?
orange juice.
So that's an alcohol intensive cocktail.
Wow.
If that is your only alcoholic beverage during the entire 9 months, you've done all the damage there is to do.
Right. Or even those four locos.
Mhm.
Oh, I remember when
Yeah,
my friend he got into the for those four locos and they were so strong and just so intense. I was just like, I don't know how you can drink
yeah,
these. Like they're just it's so much alcohol.
yeah.
But I guess that's another time. So when you found
But
out,
how the dose, the intensity of the dose, right? How many shots or how many beers, how many glasses of wine, right? That makes a difference in
yeah,
the amount of damage that is done. And the
yeah,
timing within the pregnancy makes a difference because it affects whatever is developing at the time, right? The first two things to develop is our central nervous system, primarily our brain, and our gut, right? The digestive system.
yeah,
So
that's true.
with FASD, it's very common to see a lot of IBS, a lot of those kinds of issues. It's if alcohol is consumed while the liver is being formed during that first month, it can lead that person to suffer lifelong liver damage.
Oh,
I'm friends with someone who's in stage
that's true.
4 and he's never been a drinker. It
Wow,
was
that's so
from
sad.
his mother's drink.
Wow, that's crazy.
So there's
I've heard of those issues before, but I never really put it together with FASD.
Yeah.
And how did that sit with you once your mother admitted to it? Like, what were the thoughts coming
Um,
in your mind?
all of a sudden, all the pieces, all those quirks that make it irritating to be around me for a long, long time, like my poor husband,
Oh, bless him,
all of a
right?
sudden they make sense, right? So, like I was the kid who was always rejected. I was the kid that the team captains fought over who would be stuck with me because I'm,
Mm,
scared of the ball and everything else. I was the kid whose friends lost their other friends because I
um,
was just that kid. There's a lot of us that kids out there. You know, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is a leading cause of neurodivergence, right?
yeah.
So, but we're left off of most of the list, which is kind of cray cray.
Absolutely, because it makes you feel irrelevant knowing that you're still relevant to the spectrum,
Yeah,
knowing that you're still part of it because you feel the rejection, you feel the labels, you feel it despite processing it and just going through it and just living it. Like
yeah,
for you, you are just you. You know what I mean? There's nothing
exactly.
else. And I think that's another misconception. And I'm so glad, like earlier you said you got masters on top of master's
Mhm.
degrees. What? Nobody can tell you. And your ambition to learn something and to go after something is untouched from other people who just regular. Your parents didn't even touch alcohol, and you're just like this because of, what's your reason? I need an
I
excuse from you. You're too slow.
Yeah, it's amazing how much potential alcohol has robbed from our society,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
When someone has a car accident and a blow to the head, or they have concussion syndrome from playing sports, or they have a stroke, you go to the hospital, get stabilized, you get moved over to a rehab.
Mhm.
And they do a lot of interviewing of family, friends, and everyone else to find out what was their level of functioning before the assault on their brain, right?
Yeah.
And that's the goal. But when the brain injury or injuries, if it was
Uh-huh.
more than one occasion of drinking, when that
Yeah.
happened prior to birth, how in the world do you have a baseline? There's no
Valid.
baseline to measure it to.
That's very valid.
But lacking that baseline does not mean that the person does not deserve the same kind of accommodations that you would give to a stroke victim or a car accident victim
Yeah.
or a victim of
Absolutely.
violent crime, whatever it is that caused the brain injury, because that's what this is. When an IED goes off in your brain, it it immediately kills a great many cells and they will never come back.
Yeah,
It
absolutely.
also alters a lot of cells. And so we see the
Exactly.
world differently. We process things differently. And it's
Hmm.
not to say we won't get there. But if you think about any time you're traveling from point A to point B, it's a place like that, you've done it 100 times, but all of a sudden there's a detour.
Yeah,
You take the
so true.
detour and it takes what? It takes up more time and it
Yeah,
also takes more energy.
absolutely.
Right?
It does.
You
It
better
does.
hope you have a full tank of gas if you hit a construction zone, right? Because it takes up more
Exactly.
energy. And a fully functioning brain, it only weighs 2% of our body weight, but it takes up 25% of our energy. When our brain has been injured, it's like it's a total gas guzzler, right? The energy
Mm.
levels just go just to
Yeah.
get through the basics of the day.
Yeah, it's a different processing system.
So these are your kids that are exhausted when they get home from school. And we're
Yeah.
thinking, what'd you do that was so hard?
Yeah, because they still promote it today. They say, oh, well, you can have one glass a day of
Mhm.
wine and it's okay. But people don't realize what wine content they are buying. Are they buying
Yeah.
the lowest content or the highest content? Where is their tolerance? How long have they been drinking? You know what I mean? These are things that the doctors don't say.
Yeah.
No, and you know what somebody told me is that sometimes our body will reject a pregnancy
Mhm.
if it doesn't have the same routine as it normally does. So that is the reason why doctors promote people to still live their lives as normal versus like drink have one drink a day, or if you smoke cigarettes only cut down to one cigarette a day and things like that so it doesn't interrupt
So
your body's processing system. But it's like, what do you think about that when you hear that?
cigarettes is the number one cause of ADHD. And that needs to be the label on the pack. Right now it's you'll have a small baby. Well, so what? Then my back won't hurt as bad.
Right? Like, oh, okay, small baby cigarettes. Okay, no
But
problem.
but every mama is going to want to avoid her kid having ADHD because they're a lot more challenging to parent.
Yeah, yeah.
But
So what
ADHD and FASD, about 90% of us also have ADHD.
so when you are out and about just living life normal and you see someone that's pregnant, what are your first two thoughts? Like, oh, how sweet, or oh, I hope she's not doing anything. Or have you ever caught in your life a woman actually pregnant and
Actually,
drinking or
no.
smoking? You haven't yet.
Yeah,
Oh,
I've
okay. Where are you from?
I've not. But I am friends with people who, their kids have issues. And so you do a little gentle background search, right? And
Right.
especially if they're not done with becoming parents, right? Not done growing their family. Then you want to gently provide some education without being pushy. Um, always, always, always stressing it's not the mama's fault. It's the alcohol, right? I
That's
did a talk
interesting.
recently and I said, let's talk about the root cause of FASD. It's not women drinking during pregnancy. Everyone sat up real straight in their chairs. I
Yeah,
was like,
because that
what?
sounds like a contradiction. That sounds like a contradiction all
It's
in
the
itself,
alcohol.
because they're gonna be like, well, how can you blame alcohol when the woman has the choice to choose? You know what I mean? So it's just like, what do you say to those type of people then?
Then you go back to how far along were you when you found out you were pregnant? And what was your
Right?
lifestyle prior to that?
Right? I mean, it's
Right.
so hard for women to adjust when it's time to be pregnant because it's a whole new world. And when
And
you
and that's
finally hits you,
yeah,
it's a different if it's a different momentum. But women don't realize that. I didn't realize that because before I was pregnant, I was just like, what do you mean you turn into a different person? What do you mean things change? Until
everything
you
shifts.
actually have a growing human being inside of you,
Yeah.
it's a completely
Yeah.
different way of just thinking, acting, breathing, just
Yeah.
acting, just everything. Oh my
However,
goodness.
some women have been so traumatized by situations in their life
Yes,
that
yes.
their mind is walled away from the rest of their existence. So they don't form that attachment with their preborn
Oh,
baby.
yes, yes. I met women like that
It's
too.
it's not something that's real to them. And so they're less likely to make those positive,
Conscientious, yes.
right? you know,
Mm-hmm.
but the vast majority of women, 99% or more, are immediately going to make all the lifestyle improvements that they can for the sake, we're just hardwired to do that. I'm going
Yeah.
to clean up my diet. I'm going to get rid of the caffeine and the nicotine and
All
that's
those
just
stuff.
instinctive. But if you don't
Absolutely.
know, you you cannot blame someone for using something that is legal
Yeah.
when they don't even know that they're pregnant.
Absolutely. I think that's a beautiful thing. And I think it frees the mother from that guilt and that shame.
Yeah,
And I think we need to remember that as women and as mothers, like, hey,
yeah.
we only do as much as we can do with the tools that we have, with what we were given. And not
Mhm.
everybody's given everything. We could be a field in a library full of encyclopedias and books, and even if we read every single one, it wouldn't be enough for us to still function out in this world.
Yeah.
So I think that is a great and valid point. And it sucks because I feel like we could just keep going and going with this conversation. And I'm looking at the time, I'm like,
Let me add
but
one more piece that's going to blow your mind, Mitzi.
Yeah, tell me,
You,
tell me.
you mentioned
Mhm.
about getting ready to be pregnant,
Mhm.
right? And here's where abstinence becomes so critically important. It's not just us girls.
Yeah.
Alcohol also damages the baby through the sperm.
Mm-hmm.
So sperm is made and it's a process that takes a little bit, right? And then it's stored for 3 months before it gets shot out, right?
Okay.
So
Okay. I didn't know that, so thank you for telling me.
if alcohol is consumed during those 3 months, it does damage, which affects the baby.
Did not know that. Shame on men. Shame on all those men out there who shamed women, thinking it was, oh, well, it's on you. You should have known better. Yeah. One, it's not the woman's fault.
Yeah.
Two, you may have some degree of responsibility in there
Mm-hmm.
because there's a lot of men who live their lives recklessly because they don't think that they have that type of
Right.
power or impact such as women does. But it's like,
Yeah.
no, 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 no. You need to
Yeah.
check yourself too, buddy, because that alcohol that's almost turning into an alcoholic problem. Yeah, it's gonna eventually eat up on your children,
Yes.
and that's not even born yet. That you're waiting until you're 40, 30, like 40, 50 years old to start having kids because men have their kids later on in life. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
They settle down later on in life. So with that being said, after all the partying and hot messery that you did, now you want to settle down and have a kid, and then you wonder why you can't get Jane knocked up because Jane's fine. Your little swimmers are not swimming anymore. That's a
They're
reality.
drunk.
Oh. Yeah, they're oh my God, yes, they're drunk. They're spinning in circles still. It's hilarious. Okay. Okay, so I guess to start officially wrapping up the show, what can be some lasting words of wisdom you can leave us off with?
Um, so I mentioned about kids and families bringing me in this work, but realizing that I was just such a person, right? I am among first of all, FASD hits 1 in 20 people.
Mhm.
It's over twice as common as autism, but the diagnostic rate is 0.01%, which means 99.9% of us have been floundering through life and not understanding that the reason we struggle has a biological basis. It's
Yeah.
neurological, right?
Yeah.
Standard behavior modification for kids and young adults is motivational based. You can't motivate away brain injuries,
No.
right?
Yeah.
Um, but I do have a book out. It's called Sit by Sit, Candid Conversations with People Diagnosed as Adults with FASD. The second edition will be hitting Amazon within the next couple weeks. So hopefully by early October, it will be out.
Nice.
Um, so that is aimed to reach people where they are struggling
Yeah.
in life, not understanding why they do things the way they do them,
Hmm.
and then seeing, well, maybe this is me too,
Exactly.
right?
Yes.
There's over 16 million adults in the United States who have been suffering the effects of FASD and are
Absolutely.
clueless. And
Absolutely.
diagnosis doesn't change anything. It doesn't change our past. It doesn't change our present circumstances. But what it does do is it changes the way we see ourselves so that we can
Yes.
give ourselves grace.
Yes. Yes. Oh my goodness. Such a great way to just leave us off to keep on thinking, especially usually my audience is in that older range and they really do need to think about this because they don't realize it. Maybe they don't have a good connection with their parents and this is the
Mhm.
best way to find out and acknowledge this
Yeah,
reason why. Oh my goodness, such a great topic. Thank you so
yeah.
much, ladies and gentlemen. If you guys want to know more about Patty, yes, access to all that she has to offer to the world, her lovely photo, and her access to her website so that you can continue on thinking, ladies and gentlemen. That being said, bye.